Here we are. No priest. You have probably heard it might be this way, at least sporadically for a little while, and that is likely true. More than half the parishes in this deanery have lost their incumbent clergy, and there are not enough clergy to supply all these parishes for all their services, even with a robust contribution from the retired priests. So here we are. Consequently, deacons like myself have been called upon to officiate at the daily office more and more. It's happening more and more. It's been my experience, so far at least, that people want an administration of communion from the reserved sacrament. I was officiating at a church on the South Coast a few weeks ago, and one gentleman, it was a loving interaction, but one gentleman actually, he sort of got a finger up in my face and said, "We should be having a deacon's mass." And I know that there are some of you here, Connie, who share that position. Why aren't we having a deacon's mass? Well, now I'm going to surprise you a little bit. I'm going to surprise you. I don't really think there's any such thing as a deacon's mass. I'm actually breaking the rules right now by even using that expression. The bishops have expressly prohibited us from uttering the words deacon's mass in public. We're prohibited in this diocese. And I have to say, although this may come as a surprise to some of you, and I say it with respect for people who have the opposite position, but I actually do agree with the bishops, and I'm not just being obedient. I actually agree with them. I don't think that we should be administering communion from the reserved sacrament at the office, and I want to talk about that a little bit for a few minutes. I want to say a little bit about our Eucharistic theology. What exactly happens up there? Big question. What happens to the bread and wine? What do we mean when we say it has been consecrated? Now, we live in a large, pluralistic, modern society. Most people probably have not pondered those questions too actively. But if you cast your minds back to the Reformation, you may recall that much blood was spilled over those exact questions. Wars were fought over the questions that I just asked. The Church of England being somewhat insulated, not completely insulated, but somewhat insulated from those continental wars, they were able to cool the temperature on some of those theological debates about the Eucharist. Both the Roman position on what exactly happens at the Eucharist and the Reformed position about what exactly happens in the Eucharist are very, very well thought out and precise. The Anglican position goes something like this. Don't ask too many questions. I'm only half kidding. The Roman position is that the Mass is a sacrifice. I'll be very respectful. I'm not a Roman theologian, but it's my understanding that in the Roman Church, Jesus is represented to be sacrificed again. Hence their doctrine of transubstantiation. The bread and wine have to be body and blood because it is a sacrifice. Now that was unacceptable to the Reformers for a variety of reasons. And so the original Protestant position was, we're not representing Jesus, we're just remembering. At the Last Supper, he commanded us to remember his sacrifice on the cross. Is there anything between representing and remembering? Maybe. This is an intricate thought, but you could also say that you are reenacting the Last Supper. Reenacting the Last Supper. All right? That's something a little less than representing and a little more than just remembering. We might say that that reenactment position is like the higher end of the Protestant spectrum, and the remembering is like the lower end of the Protestant spectrum. This all seems a little arcane to the modern hearer, but I say again, wars were fought. Wars were fought, right? On her accession, the first Queen Elizabeth famously said that she had no desire to make windows into men's souls. Anglicanism, at its best, and its rarely at its best, but at its best, is an attempt to be a via media, a middle road between this Roman position and this Reformed position. And the middle road is a broad road. Anglican Eucharistic theologies universally affirm the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. The real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. But the precise manner of how that presence comes to be is not really ever spelled out beyond that in our tradition. The great English metaphysical poet and Dean of St. Paul's in London, John Donne, wrote a famous expression about Anglican Eucharistic theology. He was the Word that spake it. He took the bread and brake it, and what that Word did make it, I do believe and take it. That's a very fancy way of saying, don't ask too many questions about this. None of which is to say that the Anglican position is not seriously considered. It actually is quite seriously considered. Anglicanism attempts to account for the depths of these sacred mysteries without getting bogged down in earthly rationalizations. Just as an example of this, the two camps, the rememberers and the reenactors, famously came before Queen Elizabeth arguing about that invitation to communion. The rememberers wanted the gifts of God for the people of God. Take them in remembrance that Christ died for you. And the reenactors wanted the gifts of God for the people of God. Feed on him in your heart by faith with thanksgiving. And Queen Elizabeth, in a very wise and what I would say very womanly way, said, hey fellas, maybe you could just say both. And indeed, that's how it comes down to us today. The gifts of God for the people of God, take them in remembrance that Christ died for you, and feed on him in your hearts by faith with thanksgiving. It's that and that really is Anglicanism in a nutshell. Sums it up. The middle road is broad, and the Eucharist, in our tradition, is too big to be contained to any one person's individual piety. Christ is a real presence in the Eucharist. Whatever that means to you is between you and God, and this church will hold you there. What I have to say that this church will not hold, in my opinion, is the reduction of the Eucharist to something consumable. We hold traditionally that sacraments have both form and matter. The matter of the Eucharist is the bread and wine. Now, before I say any more, let me say that on various personality inventories, I always test as a very sensory person. Most clergy are not, but I am a very sensory guy. And I really, really do, I truly do empathize with people for whom the sensory experience, the tactile experience of consuming the bread and wine is deeply important. I share that. I wish this were a Eucharistic celebration tonight. I miss having communion. It's important to me. But that in and of itself is not licensed to ignore the form of the sacrament, which is the Eucharistic prayer. When we as Episcopalians say, hey, we're having communion, we don't mean that we're consuming bread and wine, as if the bread and wine have properties, the matter has properties that can be separated from the form, from the prayer. Communion means that we're praying the Eucharistic prayer. This tradition is based entirely on the idea of corporate public worship. That's what we do here, corporate public worship. And without that aspect of it, I just don't believe that we can say we're having communion without a corporate public celebration of the Eucharistic prayer. I have real problems, and we're not doing it here, but I have real problems with some of this doggy bag communion that's going on in mainline churches. I don't think that's great theology. I don't think even the broadest bounds of Anglicanism are going to hold that. That's my opinion. Nevertheless, I totally get it. We're here. We're in a church. I'm wearing a collar. It's in the ombre. Just distribute it. I understand. I do understand. But it's not our tradition and it's not our theology, and all of us are called to be theologians. I understand that it's frustrating and frightening not to have a priest. I share that frustration. I share those fears. But, our theology can't cave into our frustration and our fears. And we can't kind of reduce communion to a question of convenience based on whether we have a priest or not. You need a priest to have communion. That's our tradition. You need a priest to have communion. And that's just sort of where it is. And so for the time being, we'll ride it out with the office. New thought, but I'm coming back. I think last week I was in Anaheim. I was at the convention center for my trade association conference. There was this massive gathering of a church called the International Christian Church. Thousands and thousands and thousands of these kids in this International Christian Church in this hotel. It was like a swarm. You could not walk through the lobby, and they are literally piled on top of one another, poring over Bibles. 24/7. Pouring over Bibles. They were from all over the world, all of the United States, all over the world. There were men and women, and it was like truly diverse, racially diverse, ethnically diverse. And Natalie and I have been thinking a lot about it. It made us really sad. It made both of us sad. We're sad for them and we're sad for us. We looked into this International Christian Church, and y'all know about the abuses of power in evangelical Christianity. You know what's going on with these churches. And I worry about handing a 22-year-old a Bible and saying, go for it, I don't think historically that's turned out so well. The church, I don't think Jesus left us the Bible, I think Jesus left us the church. I'm an Anglican. And the church helps us mediate our relationship with the Scripture. The church helps us contextualize the bit about throwing the Assyrian babies off the walls and all that hard stuff. That's the role of the church. And so these kids are just taking it right off the page. And I want them to have the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, the succession of the apostles, the laying on of hands. I want them to be a part of Mother Church. I do. I want them to be here. That's what I'm saying. I want them to be here. And it's doubly sad because I want them to have us, but I also want us to have them. Thousands of them. Thousands and thousands and thousands of them. We spoke to this Ukrainian refugee who says the ICC rescued her from the war, and she's reading Romans, and Natalie and I are like, please let somebody from a church with apostolic succession explain that to you. Don't try to figure it out on your own. It's like we want her to mediate through the church because we believe in that. But there was so much zeal, so much passion, so much investment. These guys were in it to win it. Thousands of young people living it out. They're wearing these neon green Jesus t-shirts, and they're like piled into the fire exits, reading the Bible all night. And here we are. Here we are. And we've been thinking about it, Natalie and I. We've been thinking about it, and it's sad. We have something to offer them. They don't seem to know. We don't know them. They don't know us. Yeah, I wish there was mutuality there. But I just want to say that I don't think the appropriate response to that sadness is to compromise our theology in ways that, kind of allow us to take comfort by just having communion when we really shouldn't, And we need to be above that. That would be an easy way out, and Christians need to rise above those easy ways out. We don't have to go quietly into a dark night here. I'm talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of kids in a hotel lobby looking for Jesus. Looking for Jesus, man. And we're still here. We're still here. So my challenge for you this evening is just to redirect the frustration and fear and yeah, absolutely, the sadness about, this clergy situation, this priest situation, and take it away from how we can work around it and sort of lean into the real change that needs to be made to grow the church. I don't think the question is what should we do to work around the fact that we don't have a priest. I think the question is, why aren't there enough priests? I think that's the real question. I have lots of thoughts, too many for this sermon, but clearly something is wrong with the way we're forming priests. Obviously, we don't have any. We need to think about that. And this model of rectors and parishes, it's fallen apart. This is a very healthy parish with a really beautiful history. I'm so proud to be here and be a part of it, and the beautiful history of this place. But for the first time, I think, in your history, you're catching a little glimpse of a shortage that has been exerting pressure on other churches in this diocese for years and years and years. Half-time rectors, quarter-time rectors, eighth-time rectors. Eighth time? That's 4 hours a week, right? Now, I'll wrap up because I'm risking starting a third sermon, but I just want to say that I think for generations, most Episcopalians have enjoyed the luxury of showing up to church kind of blissfully unaware of how it all came together. There was a professional clerical class that ran the church. Professional clerical class of priests that ran the church, and bishops, obviously. And what was generally required of lay people was to show up from time to time. And a really good Episcopalian sang in the choir and served on the altar and, staffed the food pantry. And these are all beautiful things. I'm not mocking those things. One might argue that our dependence on a professional clerical class has led to our downfall. I would say that, for what it's worth. But in any case, it won't hold any longer. My point is that these big, serious, tough, thorny questions of governance in the Episcopal Church, the making of deacons and priests and bishops, the disposition of church properties, and yes, liturgical theology, all of those things belong to you. They belong to you. They belong to the lay people of the Episcopal Church. The time when you could take it for granted that you would show up and there was a priest there who also was like the administrator of the church, and the thing was kind of set it and forget it for the rank and file, that time has been over for lots of parishes for a long time and is ending for many parishes now. And we need to do more than just kind of kick the can and cobble it together. The only real solution is for the lay people of the Episcopal Church to engage zealously with its future, as zealously as those kids in that hotel lobby. That's what it is. That's what it is. It's not going to be done for us. We're going to have to do it ourselves. And if the lay people of the Episcopal Church don't, you know. So, as your deacon, I look forward to prayerfully considering our path forward from here. And I would just like to say that I think that this could be a time of great zeal for us. Great zeal. And I really mean that. I really do. Amen.